said, "I am my mother's lawyer." The courtroom didn't breathe. It couldn't. The words, spoken by a voice still holding the last echoes of childhood, had sucked all the air out of the room. Every neck had craned, every eye had focused on a single, impossible point of gravity. There, beside the defendant's bench, a 10-year-old boy stood, his shoulders framed by an oversized suit, worn like a soldier's. His voice, clear and defiant, was still ringing in the wood-paneled silence. He wasn't supposed to be there. The rules, the order, the very decorum of the law said so. But he was. And in that electric, world-stopping moment, he was the only thing that seemed to belong. Judge Rebecca LaSalle, a woman who had presided over murder trials and corporate showdowns, a woman who had seen grown men weep on the stand, stared as if she were seeing a ghost. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The boy, Elijah, cleared his throat. It was a nervous sound, the only betrayal of the fear he was trying so desperately to master. He unfolded a slightly wrinkled, sweat-dampened sheet of notebook paper, covered in the determined, slightly messy scrawl of a fourth grader. "I said, I'm my mom's lawyer," he repeated, his voice gaining a fraction more strength. "And I would like to defend her now." You could hear the heartbeat of the courtroom, the soft whir of the air conditioning, the distant cough from the gallery, the frantic scratching of a reporter's pen. It all fell away. All that was left was that one, pulsing, collective beat. That moment, it wasn't just an interruption. It was a disruption, a tear in the very fabric of how things were supposed to go. The state prosecutor, a man whose entire career was built on procedure and precedent, looked like he'd been slapped. Annoyance hardened his features. He started to rise, to object, to restore the universe to its proper order. But Judge LaSalle held up a hand, a silent, commanding gesture. "Let him speak," she said. The words were quiet, but they carried the undeniable weight of the bench. Elijah took a shaky breath, his eyes finding his mother's. She was staring at him, her face a canvas of terror and astonishing pride. He anchored himself in her gaze and turned back to the judge. "She's not a criminal," he began, his voice trembling but true. "She's my mom, and she loves me, and I told her to go to work. I did, because if she didn't, we wouldn't have the rent money. We wouldn't eat. We'd be out on the street." His voice cracked, the raw, unvarnished pain of it echoing in the silent room. "My mom didn't leave me," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "She trusted me." And just like that, with those 3 words, the entire case was turned on its head. The room wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a battleground for the soul of the family. It was a confession booth where the truth was being spoken not by the accused, but for her. It was a place where truth, small and unarmed, suddenly grew teeth. That moment, that speech, took everyone in that room by the throat and held them there. But to understand the true weight of that little boy's words, to feel the history and the desperation packed into every syllable, you have to rewind. Just a bit. 2 weeks earlier, Cynthia James was not a defendant. She was a mother, asleep on her worn-out couch, the TV still murmuring a late-night infomercial. She'd gotten home from her first job, a day shift at a diner, less than an hour ago, and she was trying to steal a few hours of rest before her overnight cleaning shift began. She was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. It was a soul-deep exhaustion, the kind that comes from constantly running numbers in your head, from choosing between bills, from praying your car will start one more time. Then came a knock. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was hard, official, the kind that means trouble. Her heart leaped in her throat. She crept to the door, peering through the peephole. She saw 2 police officers and a woman in a plain coat holding a clipboard. She opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am, are you Cynthia James?" one of the officers asked, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Yes. We received a call from Child Protective Services. A report was made about an unattended minor at this address." The world tilted. The neighbor, the one who always watched from her window. Cynthia had left Elijah alone for 2 hours that afternoon to run to a last-minute job interview, the very cleaning job she was supposed to go to tonight. She had left him with dinner, with strict instructions, with a phone, with her prayers. He was 10. He was responsible. But that didn't matter. To the state of Georgia, to the cold words on that clipboard, she was now just another case. A statistic. A file to be processed. They came inside. They looked around her small, clean apartment with eyes that saw poverty as a character flaw. They asked questions that felt like accusations. Elijah watched from his bedroom doorway, his face pale with a fear he didn't understand, as his mother, his protector, the strongest person he knew, seemed to shrink before his eyes. That night ended with a notice. A court date. A threat of removal. The system, a vast and indifferent machine, had sunk its teeth in. In the days that followed, Cynthia was consumed by the grinding gears of that machine. A public defender was assigned, a tired-looking man with a stack of files a foot high. He met with her for 10 minutes in a noisy hallway, his eyes already on his next appointment. He barely knew her name, let alone her story. He saw the charge, child endangerment, and the facts, and his expression said it all. This was an uphill battle. Plead out, he suggested. Accept the probation, the parenting classes, the mark on her record. Don't fight it. The system was spinning fast, the way it always does when it chews up poor families, especially poor black families. The presumption wasn't innocence. It was incompetence. The shame was suffocating. Cynthia felt it every time she looked at Elijah. She felt like a failure, not because she didn't love her son, but because her love hadn't been enough to shield him from the harsh realities of their life, and now, from the cold judgment of the law. Elijah watched it all. He watched his mom cry behind her closed bedroom door, trying to muffle the sounds so he wouldn't hear. He watched her stare at the court papers on the kitchen table, her face a mask of defeat. He saw the light in her eyes, the one that always shone for him, begin to dim, and something inside him shifted. The helplessness he felt that night of the police knock began to curdle into a hot, fierce resolve. His mom had fought for him his whole life. Now it was his turn. So, he decided to do something. He started with the papers. He spread them out on the kitchen table after she'd gone to bed. He read them, word by word. He used his school dictionary to look up words he didn't understand. Defendant. Prosecution. Neglect. The words were clinical and cruel. He took his mission to the public library. On the slow, outdated computers, he fell down a rabbit hole. He Googled how to defend yourself in court. He watched clips of famous courtroom speeches from movies. Atticus Finch, Johnny Cochran. He watched videos of real lawyers arguing cases, trying to understand the rhythm, the language, the confidence. He took notes. On that same wrinkled sheet of paper, he scribbled down phrases. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Circumstantial evidence. But mostly, he wrote down the truth. Mom works 2 jobs. I'm never hungry. She helps me with homework even when she's tired. I told her to go. He was building his case, not with law books and precedents, but with the bricks and mortar of his own life. And when the day of the hearing came, he folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and told himself he would speak. Even if no one would let him, he would make them listen. And now here he was, back in that courtroom, the silence still ringing after his bombshell. He stood taller than his 10 years, the paper shaking almost imperceptibly in his hand. This court, Elijah continued, his voice finding its footing, says my mom endangered me. But being in an empty apartment for a few hours isn't what's dangerous. Being homeless is dangerous. Not having medicine when you're sick is dangerous. My mom wasn't endangering me. She was fighting all the real dangers for me. He looked at the jury, making eye contact with a woman in the front row. I felt safer at home, waiting for her, than I do with anyone else in this entire world. She didn't leave me behind. She worked for me. She suffered for me. And I always knew, she would come home. Every time. That was when the public defender, jolted into action, stood up. Your Honor, perhaps I could call Elijah James to the stand as a witness for the defense. It was a brilliant move, born of the moment. It would make it official. It would put Elijah's truth into the court record. Judge LaSalle nodded. Proceed. And so, Elijah James, age 10, walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on a Bible that was almost as big as his chest, and swore an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. a truth he had already been telling. He recounted the nights his mother would come home smelling of bleach and antiseptic, how she would sit with him while he did his math homework, even when her own eyes were closing from exhaustion. He told the court how she'd once sold her own grandmother's locket to pay for a field trip he wanted to go on. By the time he finished, his voice hoarse with emotion, the courtroom was no longer sure where the case was going. The lines between legal and illegal, between right and wrong, had been blurred by the powerful, messy truth of a family's struggle to survive. But everyone in that room, from the bailiff by the door to the judge on her high bench, knew one thing with absolute certainty. This boy wasn't lying, and neither was his love. The trial continued, but its heart had been replaced. The social worker, Ms. Garvey, testified that while the James family lived in poverty, their home was filled with love and structure. Struggle is not neglect, she stated firmly, her words echoing Elijah's own. Judge LaSalle watched it all, her face a study in concentration. During the final recess, she didn't read legal briefs. She just sat in her chambers, looking at the city skyline, at the thousands of windows representing thousands of hidden stories just like Cynthia's. She thought about the boy in her courtroom, a boy who had been forced to become a man, not because his mother failed him, but because the world had failed them both. The next day, for the verdict, the courtroom was packed. The story had spread. It was a story of a boy who roared. Judge LaSalle entered and delivered her ruling, her voice filled with a new kind of authority, one tempered by compassion. The law asks us to follow a rigid set of rules, she said, looking directly at Cynthia and Elijah. But justice demands we look deeper. It demands we see the human heart behind the facts. I have seen the heart in this case. It belongs to a mother who works tirelessly and a son who loves her fiercely. She smiled. Ms. James, your son did a better job of defending you than any lawyer I have ever seen. Because he didn't just argue the law. He argued for love. And in this courtroom, today love wins. Case dismissed. The room erupted. Cynthia pulled Elijah into a hug, so tight it felt like she was trying to put all the broken pieces of the last 2 weeks back together. And as they walked out of the courthouse, free and together, into the bright Atlanta sun, Elijah knew he hadn't just won a case. He had given his mother her voice back. And in doing so, he had found his own, a voice that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the most powerful defense in the world isn't found in a law book, but in a loving heart. A verdict is an ending. A gavel falls, a case is closed, and the world is supposed to move on. But what happened in courtroom 4C wasn't an ending. It was an ignition point. The story of Elijah James didn't end with case dismissed. That's where it truly began. Outside the courthouse, in the glare of the Atlanta sun, the moment that had been confined to 4 walls exploded into the world. The clip of the 10-year-old boy in the oversized hoodie declaring, "I am my mother's lawyer," was no longer just local news. It was a flashpoint. Within hours, it wasn't just a story about a cute kid. It became a conversation, a debate, a movement. On social media, in community forums, on national news talk shows, people began dissecting the moment. And it was Black voices, activists, writers, scholars, and everyday people who framed it for what it truly was. They saw past the novelty and saw the necessity. This wasn't just a boy's love for his mother. This was a Black child, born into a system designed to overlook him, who refused to be invisible. He hadn't just spoken up. He had seized a microphone from a world that wasn't offering it. The clip wasn't just viral, it was a manifesto. It was proof that a Black child's voice, filled with truth and righteous anger, could bring the machinery of institutional power to a grinding halt. It was in the midst of this whirlwind, on those same courthouse steps, that a local reporter pushed a microphone towards Elijah, who was holding his mother's hand as if he'd never let go. "Elijah," she asked, "the world is captivated by your story. What's next for you and your mom?" Elijah looked at his mother, at her tired eyes, which for the first time in weeks held not fear, but a flicker of hope. He thought of the rattling car, the rent that was always looming, the constant worry that lived in the lines on her forehead. He looked back at the reporter and said something simple, something honest. I just want my mom to be able to rest." That single, heartfelt wish became a rallying cry. With the help of the social worker, Ms. Garvey, and that same reporter, a fundraiser was started. The goal was modest, $5,000. Enough for a security deposit on a better apartment, enough to fix the car, enough to give Cynthia a month or two where she didn't have to choose between electricity and groceries. Enough for her to just breathe. They launched the page on a Friday afternoon. By Friday evening, it had surpassed $10,000. By Saturday morning, it was over $100,000. By the end of the weekend, it had climbed past $500,000, with donations pouring in from every state in the Union and from dozens of countries around the world. But it was the messages that told the real story. A single mother from Detroit wrote, "I am you, Cynthia. Your son spoke for all of our children." A lawyer from Chicago wrote, "Elijah, you reminded me why I chose this profession. You're an inspiration." A teacher from rural Mississippi wrote, "I showed your speech to my class. You've given them a hero who looks like them." And message after message from Black families echoed the same sentiment. "We see you. You spoke for our sons and daughters. Thank you for refusing to be silent." The fundraiser wasn't just about money anymore. It was a digital monument to solidarity. It was a resounding affirmation that their struggle and their voices mattered. Scene: Cynthia and Elijah at their small kitchen table. Cynthia is holding a thick, cream-colored envelope with a crimson seal. Her hands are trembling. Narrator: a few months later, long after the news cycle had moved on, something extraordinary arrived in their mailbox. It was a thick, heavy envelope made of cream-colored parchment. The return address read, "Office of the Dean, Harvard Law School." Cynthia held it as if it might either bite her or turn to gold. "What is this?" she whispered. Together, they carefully opened the crimson seal. Inside was not a form letter, but a personal message printed on embossed letterhead. Elijah read it aloud, his voice steady. "Dear Mr. Elijah James," it began, "the faculty and I at Harvard Law School have followed your story with profound admiration. Your defense of your mother in the Fulton County Courthouse was not only an act of incredible bravery, but a display of legal reasoning and moral clarity that is, frankly, unprecedented. You did not simply argue facts. You argued the very spirit of justice." Elijah paused, taking a shaky breath. Cynthia put her hand on his shoulder. He continued reading. "While we understand your formal education is far from complete, we believe a mind and a heart like yours are a once-in-a-generation gift. Therefore, it is my distinct honor to offer you a full, prepaid scholarship to Harvard Law School, to be held in trust until your successful completion of an undergraduate degree. Your place is waiting for you. The world needs more lawyers with your kind of courage, Mr. James. We hope you will bring it here." They sat there, in the quiet of their kitchen, the letter lying between them on the worn table. It was more than a scholarship. It was a key to a future they had never dared to imagine, awarded not for wealth or privilege, but for the one thing they had in abundance: love expressed as courage. 12 years later, Elijah James sat in the hallowed halls of the Harvard University Library. The boy in the oversized hoodie was gone, replaced by a confident young man with the same serious, intelligent eyes. He was a second-year law student, making good on that long-ago promise. "When you look back," the journalist asked, her voice gentle, "at that 10-year-old boy in that courtroom, what do you see?" Elijah smiled, a thoughtful, measured expression. "I see a child who is terrified," he admitted. "But I also see a child who knew, instinctively, that his mother's love was a shield. I wasn't a hero. I was a child responding to a crisis. The real question we should always ask is, why did that crisis exist in the first place? Why does a mother have to work 2 jobs and still face losing her child? Why is poverty so often treated like a crime?" The journalist leaned in. "Your story became a symbol, especially for the Black community. Why do you think it resonated so deeply?" "Because," Elijah said, his voice dropping with conviction, "in that courtroom, I knew they weren't just judging my mother's actions. They were judging our circumstances, our life, our skin color. And I knew that silence, in that moment, was a form of surrender. I had to speak because silence is a luxury that people who look like us, who have been systematically silenced for centuries, often can't afford. He didn't just go to Harvard. With the surplus from the fundraiser, he and his mother, now a community advocate herself, started the Elijah Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and support for families trapped at the intersection of poverty and the justice system. On stage, under the bright lights, he was no longer the boy lawyer. He was a leader. My voice was one, he told the captivated audience. It was amplified by circumstance, but it is not unique. I promise you, in every city, in every underserved neighborhood, there are millions of unheard voices. Children with the wisdom of elders. Mothers with the strength of warriors. Their stories matter. Their truths have power. He leaned into the microphone, his eyes sweeping the room. We cannot wait for another child to be forced to stand in a courtroom out of desperation to be heard. We must build a system where their voices are sought out, respected, and believed in the first place. We must not just open the door for them. We must dismantle the walls that keep them out. That is the work. That is the justice we seek. Elijah James became more than a headline. He became a symbol, a living testament to the fact that one small voice, armed with an undeniable truth, can challenge an empire of indifference. For the world, he was an inspiration. But for Black people, for families in the struggle, for anyone who had ever felt voiceless, he was something more. He was validation. He was proof. Proof that your story matters. Proof that your truth has weight. And proof that you are never too small to stand up and demand that the world listen.